Everybody says it's just right. Look at that. Perfect. We're waiting for the mic to come on. Mic. Well, we'll go without the mic, I guess. All right. There he is. Am I on now? Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Hello. Good morning. Am I on? I'm on. Well, we'll get started anyway. Am I on now? Okay, good. All right. Let's start with a word of prayer. Father, thank you for your word as we travel through it. Lord, help us to gain the key insights from the book of Genesis that you have for us so that we might understand your plan of redemption for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we are in hour 3 of the book of Genesis, and we're talking about the patriarchs. Can you believe I've already talked for 2 hours straight? When I get done here, it'll be 3. Imagine talking for 24 hours straight. That's what'll happen when we're done. It could happen. So we've gone through the introduction. We've gone through creation, fall, flood, and the Tower of Babel. Here we are at the patriarchs, and so this is going to be an interesting time because this is very foundational for understanding all the rest of the scriptures. If you don't get Genesis, you don't get the rest of the scriptures. If you don't understand creation, you don't understand that there's a creator. If you don't understand that there's a fall, you don't understand why people do things that they do. Why are people so bad? If you don't understand about the flood, what then? Well, you understand, number one, the depth of seriousness of God's judgment and the fact that why our current world situation is the way we are. The Tower of Babel explains how we got all the languages and ethnicities. And today, we start to focus in. We start to narrow our focus from a broad brush view of all humanity. Now we're going to narrow our focus to one small people group. And while we're doing this, one small people group, and I'm not going to mention any of it today, still the other nations are still building and moving around and migrating and conquering and dying and so on. But we're going to look at one family. And so, again, very simple outline of Genesis. It's world history and patriarchal history. Creation, fall, flood, Tower of Babel, patriarchal history. Today we're going to look at Abraham, kind of the linchpin of theology. There are 3 world religions that look to Father Abraham as the founder or the prophet or whatever of one of the foundations of their faith. One of those is obviously Judaism. The Jews in Israel come from that. The other one is obviously Christianity, because we follow in the traditions of the Old Testament. And the third one is Islam. And isn't it amazing? The devil's a deceiver. They take and they pervert the history. They change the history. It wasn't Isaac on that hill. It was Ishmael. It wasn't, all the kinds of stuff that they do. So, but 3 main things. Abraham, the linchpin. Isaac, we start to follow the elect through Isaac. Jacob, being a critical part of the nation of Israel. And then Joseph. Yes. Somehow, if you look at the first page, you'll see their genealogy. And we're going to look at that in just a minute. Yeah, so they're father, son, that kind of thing, grandfather, so on. So let's answer that question. So Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Joseph. So there are other kids involved here, but these are the 4 that really are the main ones that we're going to look at. So let's talk about Abraham. We're we're going to look at a couple of real key parts to Abraham's life. The covenant. And we talked about that yesterday in the men's breakfast, and we're going to do a little bit of expanding on some of that, but they've spent more time on it than we're going to. So a real key covenant. We're dovetailing here. We're not meaning to, but God is. So we'll just go with that. Abraham he is absolutely an amazing individual, and God made a covenant with him, but Abraham had his faults. And can anybody tell me what faults Abraham had? What's that? Yeah, I'm not sure that was impatience as much as it was lust, but Hey, would you like to have another wife? Or concubine, rather. Oh, no, not me. Okay, anyway. But you're right, impatience. He didn't trust God. He did not trust God. He did not step out in faith at that point. So even though he's the father of faith, he struggled with some faith. That was one of his faults. What was another one of them? He lied. And he did it because his wife apparently was very beautiful. And so a couple times he told a couple of world leaders, "This is my sister," which was true. His half-sister. Married his half-sister. What's that about? Yeah, today that's just not acceptable. So he had faults, but he had great faith. He was an amazing man. And I think one of the points here is, because we all fail, it's not so much, we don't need to camp so much on our failures as we do ask ourselves, how are we going to recover from this? What's our next step? And his next step was faith. And then we're going to talk a little bit, not much. Today we're not going to really talk about Melchizedek. But Melchizedek, we see both priesthoods in the book of Genesis, one coming from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Levi, not Joseph, Levi, and the other one from Melchizedek, and they're both mentioned here in the Old Testament. So Melchizedek was Abraham's priest. He paid him a tithe. So let's look at the genealogy, because this is a very interesting genealogy. Well, let's go back in your notes there. We're going to talk more about this later on. Back to Abraham highlights the struggle between the flesh and the spirit. That's something that Abraham had a struggle with, and it's pictured there for us in the difference between Ishmael and Isaac. And if you look at the book of Galatians, we discover that one is the son of the bondwoman and one is the son of the free woman, and that it's the picture of the spirit and the flesh and how they struggle one against another. It's a real struggle, and it's pictured there between Isaac and Ishmael. We also have a struggle with the flesh, and we need to pursue freedom in Jesus Christ. So that's that picture there. There's also the picture of Sarah versus Hagar. Yeah. So let's go to Abraham's genealogy. So it starts out with Terah, and the interesting thing about Terah is Terah lived through the Tower of Babel. He was there when it happened, and he only moved 150 miles away. He spoke apparently a Semitic language, a child of Shem. He had 4 kids: Abram, Sarah, Nahor, and Haran. Haran died. Haran's on the right side there. Haran died, and Lot was his son, and Abram, you see the generosity of his heart. He decided to take Lot under his wing and take care of him. And we see that Lot had 2 daughters, which became through an incestuous relationship, became the parents of the Moabites and Ammonites. So Abram on the left there married Sarai, and you can see that you got Hagar, a concubine over there, and this concubine Hagar had the son Ishmael, and Ishmael was much older than Isaac, but they had problems one with another. Eventually, Abram was forced by his wife to kick Hagar and Ishmael out of the camp, where they almost died due to dehydration. They didn't have any water, and God spared their lives. Now, Ishmael had 12 sons. Isn't that interesting? Who else had 12 sons? Jacob had 12 sons. And it's almost like these 12 are set up against the other 12. And we got the 12 of the flesh and the 12 of the spirit. And the spirit probably weren't much better than the flesh at this point. His sons weren't. So the Midianites came from Ishmael. Now, after Sarah died, he married or took as a concubine, I'm not sure which, Keturah. She had 6 sons. He sent them away, and they became the Arabian tribes. Now, from Sarah, Sarah had Isaac. I failed to put Isaac on his own ledger line there. And no, I did up there. I didn't on your notes. I did up there. Isaac. And Isaac had 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. And Esau became the father of Edom, and from which we get Herod. The Herods were Edomites. And so again, we still got this flesh and spirit thing happening all the way in the New Testament. The consequences of your behavior last way longer than your lifetime. Isn't that interesting? So the Arab peoples basically came from these 4 groups, and probably others, of Ishmael, Keturah's sons, Esau, and then the Moabites and Ammonites, and they intermarried and kind of lost their unique nationality a lot of times. And so for example, we don't know of any living Edomites today. After Herod, that's the last one we know of. Are there still people around with the Edomite heritage? Maybe. We just don't know. We don't know who they are. They were intermarried. They disappeared into the Arab peoples. So if you look at it, for the most part, we can blame Abraham for the Arab-Israeli problems. And we can blame Sarah because they decided to have Hagar as a concubine. It was Sarah's idea. That woman you have given me. So, yeah, I don't even understand that, but whatever. I do understand it to one degree. There was such a strong need for an heir, and a woman was considered inadequate if she didn't have children. And Sarah was way past childbearing age. And so this was her way of helping God. Here, God, let me fix the problem. And then all of a sudden we have to fix the fix, right? And then we try to fix the fix that we fixed. And it just never works. Up until Isaac. Right. Yeah. So on page 2, we have Terah's family. What we discover from Joshua 24:2 is that Terah, Abraham's father, he was an idolater. And he came out of Babylon. He moved to Ur. And he had 4 children that we know of. Abraham and Sarai were half brother and sister. Different. We don't know what their mother's names were. But we do know that they married one another. It was not uncommon back then for relatives to marry one another. If I married my cousin, that would be ooh. If I married my sister, that would be really ooh. Ugh. But back then, that was not uncommon. And as time has gone on, and as now medically, it's just not a good idea. Probably not by this time. There had probably a lot of people around, but early on with Adam and Eve, yeah, and we had Shem, Ham, and Japheth by the time. But remember that this is about 150 years later, so 100 years later. So the population would have grown quite substantially by this time. So a lot of interesting things going on here. Terah's youngest son, Haran, was born in Ur, Genesis 11:28, the capital of Sumer. And then what they did is they moved to a place called Haran. Haran died, and they moved to a place called Haran. And as far as I can tell, they didn't name Haran after that son. It already existed by the time they got there. The interesting thing is that the word Haran, one of the meanings of it is crossroads. It's a crossroads in their life. Here's some interesting facts. Noah was alive for the first 58 years of Abraham's life. They could have met one another. Did they? I have no idea. But they could have. 58 years is a long time. Noah was grandson or great-grandson of Shem. Abraham was the great-grandson of Shem, and that was one of Noah's sons. They could have known each other. Shem was alive for 150 years of Abraham's life. So, if you ever ask yourself the question, where did the Greeks and where did all the rest of them get their pantheon of gods? We had Noah and his wife, Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their wives, who all lived a very long time. And God said after the flood, no longer will man live that long, but their days will be 80 or 90 years. And so immediately their lifespans began to be short. But look, here's Noah. He's still around. Next generation. Shem, he's still around. Where did they get these ideas of these pantheons of gods? They got them from Shem, Ham, and Japheth and Noah. That's where they got their gods from. Isn't that an interesting thought? And there's actually a column called the Gunstrup column, which kind of details how that worked out. So can you imagine meeting Shem and Noah and talking to them about what it was like before the flood? It's, you know, you've never seen what it was like before, but wow, the tales they must have told. So here's a map for you, and it looks like Babylon. On your map, it looks like the Tower of Babel got erased. But on mine, you see the Tower of Babel just 150 miles below Ur. Terah himself moved to Ur of the Chaldeans. And then Terah and his family, he took them as far as Haran. Isn't it interesting that God, at this point, God could have chosen any other piece of real estate in the world for his chosen people. The whole world is available for him, but he chose the promised land, Canaan. Why did he do that? Well, it turns out that it's a critical place. I mean, he knew what was going to happen. It's a bridge between east and west. It's a bridge between north and south. And so that became a land where armies always marched through. It's a central place where the gospel went out to the world. And that's why he chose that. So here's some the call of Abraham. God told Abram to move to Canaan. His family left the center of confusion, Babel. That's what Babel is. It's the center of confusion where everyone was confused. To go to the center of God's will, Canaan, the lush lowland. He chose Israel for that reason. Now, the interesting thing is it's hard to see this, but if you read the scriptures, you see that this is true. God called Abraham to go to Canaan while they were still in Ur. It was Terah's decision to move from Ur to Haran. Acts 7:2-4 tells us that. Also, if you look just a few paragraphs down, it says, now the Lord had said unto Abram, get out of your country and from your kindred and from your father's house to a land I will show you. I'll make you a great nation. I will bless you and will make your name great. And you will be a blessing, and I will bless them that bless you, curse him that curses you, and in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. This statement happened in Haran, but notice the first few words. Now the Lord had said to Abraham. That means he previously said it to him before he got to Haran. So there are two calls of Abraham. Abraham wasn't listening very well. The first call happened in Ur. Think about that. Why did Terah move from Ur to Haran? Well, maybe it had to do with the loss of his son Haran. But maybe it also had to do with the fact that God called Abram, and Abram said, let's move, Pops. Let's move somewhere else. And so he may have had, we're speculating here, he may have had a big influence on his father. The second call after Terah died came in Haran. Now, Terah's name means delay. Isn't that interesting? They went all the way to Haran, the crossroads, and they delayed. There's a story here somewhere behind the words, isn't there? And so that's the story of Abram. He had faith, but even he struggled with failure, and he delayed. So he went to Haran, then he went down to Israel. At one point he went down to Egypt. He came back up. Let's look at the 7 I wills of Genesis chapter 12, 2 through 3, which we read. These are 7 things that God told Abraham. Interesting that there are 7 here. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. I will make you a blessing. I will bless them that bless you. I will curse them that curse you. I will bless all the families of the earth through you. So again, the 7 I ams are the 7 blessings of Genesis 12, 2 through 3, make the foundation of the Abrahamic covenant. And let's look at that Abrahamic covenant. It's a promise of blessing. There's 3 things that make up the Abrahamic covenant, and they typically call these the land, seed, and blessing, or they call it the Abrahamic covenant, the Palestinian covenant, dealing with the land, and then they deal with the Davidic covenant. So those 3 covenants you find there. The first one is the promise of blessing, chapter 12, verse 2. In his seed, all the nations will be blessed. So today, we are thankful for Abraham because we've been blessed because of his faith. He is the father of faith. In fact, the New Testament tells us that, doesn't it? And by faith, Abraham. And Abraham had faith before he had works. Works followed his faith. So the second is the promise of the land. Some people call this the Palestinian covenant, although I really don't like the name Palestinian covenant because don't remember which Caesar it was, but one of the Roman emperors might have been around 70 AD, you never know. He was so angry at the Jews that he decided to rename Israel. And he decided what he would do is he would name it after their worst enemies, the Philistines. And so that's where we get the word Palestine. Are there any Philistines left in the land of Palestine? Well, apparently, but I don't know. We can't really identify them, so we don't know if they're really Philistines there or not. But he renamed that, and we have been dealing with that whole issue ever since. Is that really the land of Israel? Today there's this whole big movement. The Muslims constantly put out this propaganda that says there is no historical or geographical or archaeological evidence that all these things that the Israelites have in their Bible ever happened. And we keep digging up more and more and more and more. We dig up coins that David's got his face on it. We pick up all kinds of crazy things that are there. I went to the Promised Land, and everywhere you look, there's something having to do with the Bible. It's absolutely amazing. The promise of the land. So, and this was made with his descendants forever. In verse 14 and 15, this was all the land that he could see. It was given to them forever. How long is forever? So if you have a problem with the nation of Israel, you have a problem with God. Because I'm not the one who agreed to give that crazy nation. The Orthodox Jews are completely, it seems like, out of their mind, out of their school. I'm not the one who decided to give them that land, but all I know is that, and I don't know how this works out, but all I know is this. If you bless them, God blesses you. If you curse them, God curses you. And so we need to bless them. Eventually, verse 16 and 17 say that his descendants would be like the sand of the sea. And of course, if they forsook him, they would be punished. Then there's the promise of the seed. Who's the seed? Jesus is the seed, singular. Singular. Made a covenant with David eventually, and his family would produce the Messiah who would reign over his people forever. His heir would come, Abraham's heir would come from his own body. And this is the problem. He made the promise, he didn't have kids. They got older, they didn't have kids. He approached 100, they still didn't have kids. And there's got a little bit of doubt going in there. In fact, God wanted us to understand how serious he was about this covenant, that he took what we call a blood oath covenant, and he put it in scriptures. It's the weirdest, one of the strangest things in the Old Testament. You read it, and if you don't know what it means, you say, what is going on there? What they did is they took these 3 animals, I think it's a bull, goat, sheep, and they cut them in half. And then they took a bird, and they put one bird on one side and one bird on the other, rather than cut it in half. And there was a path down the center of them. And the blood oath covenant was this, usually made between a king and vassals. Normally, the king did not walk through. Sometimes if 2 people would do it, the both of them would walk through the center. But if a king made it, his servants would walk right down the center of those animals that were cut in half. And the message was this: if I ever break this covenant, may you cut me in pieces like these animals are cut in pieces. That's a pretty serious message, wouldn't you say? But here's what happened in Genesis 15 when God did the covenant. Instead of making Abraham walk down the center and make the covenant with Abraham, he put Abraham to sleep. It was like a daydream, so all he could do was watch God. He couldn't move. He just watched. And God, in the form of the Holy Spirit, in the form of fire, walked down the center, making the covenant with himself. Now, if Abraham had walked down the center, Abraham could have broken the covenant, and it would have paid a terrible price. But since God made the covenant based on his own character, based on who he is, that covenant is what we call an irrevocable covenant. It's an unconditional covenant. God's not going to break that covenant. He said, this is what I'm going to do, and all you can do is watch. So when you read that from Genesis 15 today and read that thing, you'll say, well, this is really strange. But you will understand a little bit more about this. And the message is this: I will never break this covenant. So God made, in the book of Genesis, God made a prophecy to Abraham. We'll call this the Abrahamic prophecy. The land was given to Abraham and his descendants, and here's the prophecy. His descendants would be afflicted in Egypt for 400 years. Actually, it was 430. 430 years. And if you look there, I've got it noted. It says, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not there, and will be servants there. They will be afflicted for 400 years. Why did God send the nation of Israel down to Egypt? Now, here's something you need to understand. It's kind of a principle of the Old Testament. Anytime anybody who's an Israelite leaves the land of Israel, it's typically out of disobedience, or typically because there's going to be judgment following. So you got For example, Ruth, they went over to Moab, and what happened when they went to Moab? Her husband died. Her sons died. She came back a widow. But something good came out of it because Ruth was in the line of Christ, right? So good things can happen. When Abraham went down to Egypt because of famine, bad things happened to him. He lied to Pharaoh and caused problems. They weren't supposed to leave. David left the land and went to the Philistines, and bad things happened there. Remember, even Jesus fled to Egypt. Isn't that interesting? Out of Egypt, he did that to fulfill prophecy, though. Out of Egypt have I called my son, was the prophecy he was fulfilling. So when they went to Egypt, what happened to the nation of Israel? They eventually became slaves, and they had to build some of the storage cities for the pharaohs. So, but all the same, God always does this. When something bad happens to us, it often becomes a platform for something good happening to us. And so this was the incubation chamber of the fledgling nation of Israel. And so for 430 years, they grew and they prospered and they had children and their tribes grew and they prospered there in that little land of Goshen until they became, well, about 2 million people left the land. Amazing, amazing. But there's another reason why they went down there for 400 years. When they returned, they would displace the Canaanites. And remember, they came into the land? And this is one of the things that people constantly bring up as an objection to Old Testament theology. They say, oh, God is so evil, he wiped out genocide. He wiped out those people in the land. Yes, he did. And he waited 400 years before he did it. Because it says there that he would wait until the iniquity of the Amorites was complete. Well, what does that mean? Well, they, even just like in the days of Noah, they were involved in child sacrifice. In fact, they were involved in some of the worst child sacrifice you can think of. They had an idol called Molech, which was a hollow idol, which had arms that were out like this. And they would take their children and they put a fire in that, and they would get that Molech idol red hot, and they would place the child in the arms of that idol, and they would burn that child up. Much like what happens in saline solution abortion today. Killing children. It's the worship of Molech reincarnated today. Absolutely horrifying. There's nothing nice. There's nothing clinical. There's nothing sweet about abortion. It's the dismembering and destruction of babies. And it's horrific. Their sins included child sacrifice, infanticide, rampant sexual immorality. In fact, you know, they've uncovered, like, say, temples of Baal where they've whole graveyards of women and children that were sacrificed. Just terrible stuff. Violence, murder, oppression, idolatry, systematic injustice. The same people who say, why doesn't God do something about the injustice of this world, are the same people who say, how could God cause this genocide? Well, when he steps in and does something, you yell genocide. When he doesn't, you say unfair. And God says, like he said, I think it's in Ezekiel, he said, you say I am unfair. Oh, you're the one that's unfair. It's you who are unfair. So that's the Abrahamic prophecy. A couple of big reasons why it happened. Number one, to be an incubation chamber for the nation of Israel. Number two, to wait for... God always gets people to repent, right? 400 years? That's a long time. He's waited for you a long time, you and me. And he's still waiting. Still waiting. He hasn't zapped you yet. No lightning strike. That's because you're in church. And by the way, we give out construction hats in church. So if you need one so the building doesn't fall in or whatever. So let's see here. We've got Abram's new name, Abram to Abraham, Genesis 17:5. You know, God is the name giver. And in the Bible, you find that God often changed people's names. And in fact, Christianity kind of early on took the concept that God changes people's names, and they began to give people 3 names instead of 2. Instead of me being Dennis, son of Mr. Kreiss, now my name is Dennis Andrew Kreiss. And my middle name, typically it's considered my Christian name. And this is kind of where the practice came from. But God is the name changer. And names, especially in Hebrew, the Hebrews were really important because while my name, how many of you know what my name means? Okay. That's it. That's the one. That's right. And so I live out my destiny in my name. My name actually comes from the Greek word the Greek god Dionysus, or something like that. And he's the god of wine or the god of worship. And so living out my destiny, I get drunk, right? Oh, no, I worship. I'm a worshiper. A worshiper. But they changed the names because they had to do with their destiny and their purpose. We got Saul to Paul. You know, we've got Simon to Peter. We've got a lot of names that are changed. Abram to Abraham, from exalted father, which is a really good name. He was an exalted father. And the strange thing about it is he wasn't a father, even though he was called Father Abraham. Father Abraham, that's right. We did that. We were going to do that next VBS, right? They changed his name to the father of many nations. Now, is he the father of many nations? Well, we saw his, you know, he is the father of many nations, literally. From Sarai to Sarah, from my princess to mother of nations. That's a little bit, you know, it isn't quite as clear as Abraham's is, but that's kind of what that is. So that was their destiny. Abraham's new name meant that this is, in the Bible, we look back and we trace part of our lineage, spiritual lineage, to Abraham. God introduced a thing called circumcision here, right before the law, by the way. He introduced it to Abraham, and he said, "You are now my covenant people, and you shall mark that covenant by a thing called circumcision." And circumcision is a permanent physical mark in the flesh. It's something you don't go, well, I guess if you do plastic surgery, you can get it back, but it's a permanent mark in the flesh. The interesting thing is, medically, he said, do it on the 8th day. On the 8th day, it turns out that vitamin K, a clotting element, is not formed until the 5th day, and it lasts to the 5th to the, you know, starts the 5th to the 7th day. Also, another one of those things, I can't even pronounce this one, prothrombin, necessary. It starts the 3rd day, 30%, but it peaks the 8th day at 110%. I don't know how you get 110%. Anyway, maybe that's 10% more than normal. And that's, how did Moses and how did Abraham know to circumcise the 8th day? Well, God knows everything, medically, biologically, everything. And he said, this is the precise time you ought to do it. But it's more than just something done medically. It's a sign and a seal of the covenant. It marked you off. It said, you are a child of mine, an earthly child of mine. And so that's what that was about. Now, Abraham and Lot play an important part in the book of Genesis as well. And remember, Lot is his nephew, and he took care of him. At one point, Lot's flocks grew too great, and Abraham's flocks grew too great. And they said, we can't even get along anymore. Their hirelings, their shepherds were fighting. They couldn't get along. And so Abraham said, Lot, you choose what you want, and you go where you want to go, and I'll go the other way. And where did Lot choose? He chose the fertile plains of Sodom and Gomorrah, and what happened to them? Sometimes it looks like you're making good choices when you're really making bad choices. And at one point in Genesis 18, to talk about the bad choices he made, I've got the word Christophany with a capital E there. Have no idea how that happened. Don't know. I don't think that E is supposed to be there at all. It just somehow showed up. A Christophany is a pre-incarnate, I'm using big words, right? Pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament before his birth. And so Jesus Christ appeared typically whenever you see a physical expression of God in the Old Testament, we would call that a Christophany. The angel of the Lord, a Christophany. God appearing in the flesh before his birth. God appeared to Abraham, and remember he said to Abraham, shall we keep this from Abraham? And he said, there was three of them, interestingly enough. Three of those men there. And he said, no, we're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham's like, I got relatives there. I got a nephew there and children. They've got children there, and this could be bad. And so Abraham said, if there's 50 people, 50 righteous people down there, would you destroy them? And God said, for 50 I wouldn't. Abraham thought about that. That's probably not 50 people down there that are righteous. How about 40? Okay, I won't. How about 30? How about 20? How about 10? If there's even 10 down there, I won't destroy it. That's pretty generous of God, isn't it? You, as a godly individual, may be the salt of the earth and the light of the world and be holding back judgment on this nation. Isn't that something to think that your godly life could have that much impact? If there's 10 people in Dixonville, I will not destroy Roseburg. Well, God knows what it is. Yeah. If you want to get technical, there is none righteous, no, not one. So you lose no matter what. So do you think that's what God meant in that passage? If there's 10 people who follow me in faith, maybe. Maybe that's what he meant by that passage. Well, anyway, there weren't 10. Not even in Lot's family there weren't 10. Well, that doesn't speak volumes about his family, does it? Maybe he didn't have 10 people in his family. I don't know. We only know of 4 of them, his 2 daughters. Of course, he had son-in-laws who didn't follow him out of the city. 2 daughters and his wife, and we only know of 4 in his family, plus the 2 son-in-laws. So there weren't 10 there. So the angels in Genesis 19 visited Lot, and they said, you need to get out of here. There was a whole mess there about sodomy and about homosexuality there. Yes. Yes. Yeah. 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 At least we had Nineveh repenting, huh? Sodom and Gomorrah didn't. In fact, you can go there today, and you can, where they believe they were, it's just a bunch of salt balls, and they got Lot's wife. We got to look at Lot's wife, and or what they say is Lot's wife, anyway. And it's not lush and green anymore at all. So the interesting thing is Lot and his daughters and his wife left, and his wife looked back, turned into a pillar of salt, and his daughters took off with him. Then they went up to this cave, and they said, look, we gotta pass on the family line. There was incest going on there, and they produced the Moabites and the Amorites. So more problems for the nation of Israel. Abraham and Ishmael, we may not get done with Abraham today. Look at that. Now, Abraham lived 430 years before the law. And the Bible says the promises that preceded the law cannot be disannulled by it. Galatians 3:17. And we already looked at the Ishmael versus Isaac, flesh versus the spirit. There are two principles there. And we looked at the bondwoman should not be the heir. And we see that the godly line followed through Isaac. And here we have a wonderful picture of Abraham sacrificing Isaac. And we all think that he was a little kid when this happened. But apparently he was more like 25 or 35 years old when this happened. He wasn't a little kid at all. He was a grown-up man at this time. Isn't that crazy? That ruins the whole story. But, so if God ever told you to kill your child or your wife or something like that, should you listen to him? Craig, what do you think? As a policeman? I would do you think that Abraham questioned whether this was coming from God or not? Interesting. Contextually, Abraham was a friend of God. And apparently he spoke to God verbally more often than I do. God spoke to him more often than God speaks to me. Well, I do speak to God. God does speak to me. Not quite the same way there. But I think that Abraham had come to hear the voice of God and understand the voice of God and knew the voice of God. And Hebrews tells us this, that Abraham believed that God was able to resurrect his son. Because what had God said? This is the son of promise. This is the son in which all the nations of the earth will be blessed. This is the son through whom all my promises will come through. You waited until, we didn't go through that. I thought, okay, that comes later. Okay. We waited until Abraham was 100 years old before he even had Isaac. Amazing. So there were some big promises. I mean, God had come to him numerous times. Most of the time, I would say this. If you hear voices that tell you to kill someone, it's probably a bad idea to listen to them. But now you remember what happened, that Abraham took the knife, and before he was able to use it, God said, "Stop! Now I know that you trust me completely." And God provided a ram, not a lamb, interestingly. A ram was caught in the thicket, and Isaac then becomes a messianic type of God providing a lamb for us. And the substitute situation there, again, Jesus is our substitute. So an amazing thing happened there. Now, let's look at Isaac's life. And Isaac had a startling birth. Sarah was 90. Abraham was 100 when they had Isaac. Let's see, who's the oldest person in here? No, Frank's not here. Are you ready to have another child? I just, I cannot imagine my mom, when she was 90 years old, having another child. She was pretty frail at that time. But God can do what he wants. Humanly speaking, with God, nothing shall be impossible. Luke 1:37, that was told to Mary, another impossible birth. But that one was the virgin birth. So it was a startling birth. He was the selected son. Ishmael was not the son of the promise, even though they tried to fix what God had done. Keturah and her sons were not the sons of promise. Isaac was the son of promise. God constantly is putting landmines. He's constantly, Satan is constantly putting landmines, constantly trying to subvert the plan of God. But God always wins. Just remember that. God always wins. He had a spared life and a special bride. His life was spared instead of Abraham killing him on the altar. And a special bride, and remember, he married one of his cousins. So back to that, if you look, you'll get to see who that was. This is the interesting thing. Isaac was a kind of, I don't know, maybe in his 40s or later when he got married. He stayed single all that time. Isaac is a very interesting person. He's probably one of the most underestimated of the four of the whatever these guys are. Patriarchs, thank you. The four patriarchs. He never left the promised land. We don't find very many faults with him. He had one. They had Esau and Jacob, and he chose the wrong one. But other than that, and check this out. Isaac and Rebekah have twins. Esau, the firstborn, means red. Jacob, the second, his name means supplanter. And Romans 9:11 through 13 says this: for the children being not yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand. So God doesn't always choose the first person, the firstborn. He chooses the right person. Not of works, but of him who calls. It was said unto her, the elder shall serve the younger, as it is written, Jacob I have loved, and Esau have I hated. Wow, that's quite the statement. And you remember that in the Hebrews use a lot of hyperbole or exaggeration to prove a point. And Jesus said to his disciples, if you don't hate your mother and father, you're not worthy of me. Did he want us to hate our mother and father? Hyperbole, a little bit of exaggeration. His love for Jacob was so great that it looked like hate when compared to Esau. So, and of course Esau wasn't chosen. Esau went his own way. Esau became a pagan, all that kind of stuff. So now let's look at Esau and Jacob. Esau and Jacob. Jacob was a supplanter. You know, God chooses imperfect people, and Jacob was an imperfect person, and he chose him anyway. He stole Esau's birthright. Remember? Esau stumbled into camp. He was hungry. He'd been out hunting. He didn't catch anything, and Jacob was over there cooking some broth, and Esau said, oh, let me have some of it. And Jacob looked at him and said, sell me your birthright for a pot of porridge, and I'll let you have it. I'm starving. I can't handle it. Yes, I'll sell it to you. Craziness. He couldn't handle it. He couldn't wait for 5 minutes to go to the refrigerator and get something for himself. Oh, they didn't have refrigerators. Okay. But all the same, he stole his birthright. He stole his blessing at the end of his father's life, Isaac's life. Isaac told Esau that I'm going to bless you. Rebekah got wind of it. Rebekah loved Jacob. Isaac loved Esau. Rebekah caught wind of it, and she said to Jacob, we got to do something about this, or your brother's going to get the blessing instead of you. At the end of life, it was, or at some point in their life, it was typical for those people to place their hand on them and to give a blessing and say, this is how God's going to bless you. Oftentimes a prophetic blessing in the Bible. And so that's what Isaac was going to do to Esau. And so what did Jacob do? He took skins of goats and he put them on his arm because Esau was hairy and Jacob was smooth. Would that fool you? Well, remember, Isaac was blind and very old and apparently kind of doddering and wasn't able to discern the difference. And he gave Jacob the top blessing, which was what God wanted, but Could God done it differently if Rebekah and Jacob had chosen differently? Yes, he could have. Yeah, I mean, Esau could have had a heart attack, right? Anything. So, regardless, so because he did that, he knew Esau was angry at him, so he fled to Haran. Remember the crossroads? This is a crossroads in his life as well. And there, the interesting thing was that he lost his mother. He never saw his mother again. She died before he got back. And he had to work for how many years? What's that? 7 years for Rachel and 7 for Leah first, Rachel second. I don't know exactly how that worked out. Because the deceiver got deceived. You know, be careful what you do because people will use it against you and they will do the same thing to you, but they'll do it first. Yeah, that's my brother used to always say the golden rule was. Do unto others as they're going to do to you, but do it first. He called that the golden rule. I'm like, I don't think that's really what it's... No, that's not what it... Yeah. So Laban fooled him and gave him Leah instead of Rachel. How he didn't know that? I'm trying to figure this out, but apparently they must have, anyway, it was dark. Now he had 2 wives, and then he took 2 concubines and returned to the promised land where he made up with Esau, and he had 12 sons between those 2 wives and 2 concubines. So while he's on his way back to the promised land, God meets him. And he wrestles with God. Now, Jacob's name means supplanter. And the supplanter wrestled with God and tried to get God to bless him in that wrestling match. And the blessing was this. God changed his name. God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. And this is officially the start of the nation of Israel. Jacob was the first Israelite. Abraham was not an Israelite. He was Semitic. Isaac was not an Israelite. He was Semitic. Jacob was officially the father of the nation of Israel because Abraham had other nations. Isaac had other nations. But Jacob only had the nation of Israel. He had 12 sons, which became the 12 tribes. And his name Israel means wrestles with God, or it also means God prevails. So anytime you say Israel, you know that you're talking about a nation that wrestles with God, and they do terribly. And we also know that one of these days, always going to be true, God prevails. So anytime you say Israel, you're saying God prevails. God prevails. The name change is the moment that the nation of Israel is born. We go from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to one of the 12 sons, Joseph, the second from the youngest. There were 12 of them, and we've got those listed on the last page. But Joseph was a son of Rachel. So if you look at that chart on the bottom there, you see that Reuben was a child of Leah, Simeon Leah, Levi Leah, Judah Leah. Oh, and then we got a concubine. Dan was from Bilhah. Naphtali was from Bilhah. Another concubine, Gad was from Ziplah. Asher from Ziplah. Issachar from Leah. Zebulun from Leah. And finally, we get 2 from Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. So, Joseph was a favorite son because Rachel was the favorite wife. Is it a good idea to have a favorite wife? Yes, it is. You better have only one. Or else. Is it a good idea to have a favorite son? If you only have one, it's okay. I tell all my kids they're my favorite. But, we do treat our kids differently because they are different. And that's just the way it goes sometimes. And they act different. They get disciplined different. We love them a little different. But we got to be careful about favoritism. It can cause problems. He became a despised brother. He was a dreamer of dreams. His brothers hated him, sold him into slavery, where he became a mistreated servant, where Potiphar's wife messed him up. He got thrown into Pharaoh's jail, where he was raised up to the place of second in command in the entire land of Egypt. God put him there because he was going to bring down the nation of Israel so they could be incubated in the land and so they could keep from starving in the land of Canaan. And that's exactly what happened. And what I love is when you get to that story where Joseph is there and his brothers are there and his father have died and they're all afraid that Joseph, being so powerful, is just going to get revenge on them. Joseph said, listen, you guys don't understand anything. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. It is a really, well, that's not his jacket. Yeah, that's not the one. Yeah. Yeah, the men in plaid. That's right. All right, last slide, and we're done. These are the 12 tribes of Israel. Their flags are on the right, and their gemstones, the gemstones that were on the priests' ephod, also the gemstones that are in the book of Revelation in the city, they're there. And so what we have is we have a couple of things. I want you to notice the top three. Reuben is the firstborn, but he lost the birthright because of his transgression. And what was his transgression? He slept with one of his daddy's wives. Horrible. Simeon also lost his place in the tribe because him and Levi were involved in terrible violence. They went in and they wiped out an entire city. And Levi lost his place as a tribe because of that. Levi didn't lose his place as a tribe, but he lost his inheritance. He became the Levites. And the Levites and the priests did not have an inheritance. They were scattered among the 12 tribes. So it's very interesting that happened. Judah, which was the next one in line, he is the one that was granted the birthright. And the scepter shall not depart from Judah was the prophecy that Father Jacob gave to him. And from Judah came David and the Christ. Samson came from Dan. The prophetess Deborah came from Naphtali. Down a little bit further. Wow, that's a weird Asher. I got a word there. I wish some of you would define the word wheelyor. Okay, that's a new word to me. Don't know how I got that one in there. You see it in your notes there, wheelyor? Yeah. Wealthy in agriculture and abundance, I think that's supposed to say. Issachar understood the times. Zebulun were merchant sailors. Now, Joseph, interestingly enough, got divided up into two tribes between his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and they took the place of Joseph and Simeon. Simeon was out. Isn't that crazy? Simeon didn't get an inheritance. He's out, but Ephraim and Manasseh are in. They got a double inheritance. Now, the interesting thing is when you get to the book of Revelation, what happens? Simeon is back in. So God restores them. And then Benjamin, from which we get King Saul and Apostle Saul or Paul. Very interesting. First king and then the apostle to the Gentiles. Well, we're going to stop here because we are 3 minutes late. Lord, just thank you for this understanding. Help us to see how you started this and how this dramatically impacts us. Help us to learn the lessons that the patriarchs teach us. In Jesus' name, amen.